Rain fell in heavy sheets the night Naya was born, drumming against the rooftops like restless spirits demanding to be heard. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the earth with its mighty voice. The midwives exchanged uneasy glances as the wails of the newborn girl pierced the storm's roar. "A child born on such a night," one murmured under her breath. "It is a sign." Another woman clutched the beads around her neck. "A cursed fate," she whispered. But Mama Eve, cradling her child in trembling arms, refused to listen. She traced the tiny girl's face, her heart swelling with fierce love. Beyond the walls of the hut, the village elders gathered, their voices low. Elder Baku, the chief, stroked his graying beard as he listened to the whispers. "The rain washes away the weak," someone muttered. "A child born under its fury. The ancestors do not smile upon such things." But Baku only grunted. "If she is weak, she will prove it in time. Kumba has no place for the feeble." And with that, the decision was made. Nya would grow, but no one would expect much from her. In Kumba, strength was the breath of life. Warriors were celebrated like kings, their bodies adorned with beads and scars that told stories of battles won. Men walked tall, their voices carrying weight, their names sung in praise. Even women earned respect through resilience. Those who could weave the strongest baskets, gather the most food, or birth sons who would wield spears. Weakness was a stain, a burden. It was ignored, cast aside like a broken drum that no longer played its rhythm. Nya learned this early. She was small, her frame thin like a reed, her voice soft like the hush of evening wind. When she passed, few turned their heads. The village children barely noticed her, except when they needed someone to mock. "Shadow girl," they called, her laughing as she flinched. "She walks like a ghost. Maybe she'll vanish one day." And though their words stung, Nia did not speak back. She only lowered her gaze and kept walking. Her cousins, Abeni and Zuba, were the loudest among them. Abeni, tall and quick-footed, already boasted that he would be a warrior like his father. Zuba, though younger, followed in his brother's steps, eager to prove himself. "Look at her," Abeni sneered one day as the village children gathered for a game of wrestling. "Even the wind could knock her over." Zuba grinned, stepping forward. "Let's see if she can even stand her ground." Before Nia could move, he shoved her hard. She stumbled, the dust rising around her as she hit the ground. Laughter erupted like a fire. Nya did not cry. She did not speak. She simply picked herself up, dusted off her tunic, and walked away. She did not see the way Elder Baku watched from afar, his face unreadable. To the chief, she was nothing more than a leaf caught in the wind. Insignificant. Forgettable. When the village gathered for feasts, she was left at the edges of the crowd, her presence unnoticed. When decisions were made, she was never asked to listen. The weight of the village's judgment pressed upon her like a stone. But Mama Ife saw what others did not. At night, when the world was quiet, she held Naya close and whispered, "A seed does not shout as it grows, but one day it becomes a mighty tree." Nya clung to those words, though doubt crept into her heart like vines twisting around a weak branch. What if the seed never grew? What if she remained as she was, a shadow in the background, unnoticed and unimportant? And so, she sought refuge where no voices could reach her. Deep in the forest, beyond the tallest trees, lay the river of ancestors. Its waters glowed beneath the moon, reflecting the wisdom of those who had walked before. Here, Naya felt the weight of silence differently, not as loneliness, but as something sacred. She knelt by the river's edge, listening. The wind rustled through the leaves, the water murmured against the rocks, and though she could not yet understand, she knew the river whispered secrets. Perhaps one day it would speak to her. Kumba slept beneath the silver glow of the moon, unaware of the danger lurking at its borders. The wind carried an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. But in the shadows, figures moved, silent as serpents, their eyes gleaming with wicked intent. A hand reached for a bundle of dried grass. Another grasped a torch. In moments, the flames licked the sides of the village huts, creeping hungrily across the thatched roofs. Goats bleated in terror, chickens flapped wildly, and the air filled with the crackling of fire and the sharp cries of panic. Villagers stumbled from their homes, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. But before anyone could understand what was happening, a voice cut through the chaos like the roar of thunder. "Bring forth your strongest." The demand echoed across the village square, sending a shiver through those who heard it. At the heart of the destruction stood a towering figure, his dark robes billowing like storm clouds. Warlord Onika. His gaze swept across the terrified faces before him, his lips curling into a smirk. "Kumba is weak," he spat. "You do not deserve to keep your sons when you cannot even defend your homes. You will give me 10 warriors, or I will take everything you have left." His words were not a threat. They were a promise. Elder Baku, his old eyes weary with the weight of leadership, stepped forward. His voice was heavy, reluctant. "We will give you what you ask, great warrior. Spare the rest." He turned to the trembling crowd. Abeni, Zuba, and 8 other young boys were chosen, their faces pale, their hands shaking as they were pulled from the arms of their mothers. The village watched in silence, grief tightening their throats. No one dared to speak against Onika's cruelty. But Naya felt something stirred deep within her, a feeling she could not name. Her heart pounded as she watched the warlord's eyes move over the crowd, his hunger not yet satisfied. She had seen darkness before, but never like this. It clung to Onika like a shadow, shifting and writhing as if alive. "He is not just a man," she whispered, gripping her mother's hand. "He is something else, something wrong." Mama Eve squeezed her daughter's fingers but did not reply. Then the warlord's gaze locked onto them. "You," he said, pointing at Mama Aoife, "you are no ordinary woman. I have heard whispers of your power. A widow who walks unafraid, who knows the ways of the ancestors. Tell me, woman, are you a sorceress?" The air grew thick, suffocating. Mama Aoife shook her head, her expression calm. "I am only a mother," she said simply. Onika's laughter was cold, a mother who hides secrets. Before anyone could move, his men seized her. She struggled, but their grip was iron. Naya cried out, rushing forward, but a heavy hand shoved her back. "Please," she begged, her voice raw. "She has done nothing." The villagers remained frozen, their heads bowed, their feet rooted to the ground. Not one voice rose in protest. As Onika dragged Mama Aoife into the night, her eyes found Nia's. "Be strong," she mouthed before the darkness swallowed her. The village remained still long after the warlord and his men disappeared. Only the crackling of dying flames and the soft sobs of grieving mothers filled the air. Naya stood alone, her fists clenched, her soul burning. They had taken her mother. They had stolen her world, and no one had lifted a hand to stop it. That night she ran, past the silent huts, past the ruined fields, past the edge of the village where the trees whispered of forgotten things. The river of ancestors lay before her, shimmering beneath the moonlight. She fell to her knees, her breath ragged, her tears hot. "Help me," she pleaded to the water, to the spirits, to anyone who would listen. "I am nothing. I have no strength, but I cannot let this happen. I cannot let them win." The wind shifted. The water rippled, though there was no breeze. The night grew colder, as if something unseen had awakened. Then a voice, soft yet powerful, ancient yet familiar, whispered her name. "Nia!" The sound sent a shudder through her bones. She gasped, turning her face to the sky. Something was listening. Something had answered. At the first light of dawn, when the village still slept beneath the weight of the night's silence, Nia slipped away. Barefoot, she stepped beyond the last hut, past the fields of cassava and millet, into the wilderness that no soul dared to enter. The forbidden hills loomed ahead, their peaks swallowed by mist, their valleys whispering with the voices of things unseen. The elders warned of spirits that lured travelers to their doom, of ancient curses woven into the very roots of the land. But Nia did not turn back. The earth was damp beneath her feet, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves and old magic. Behind her, the village would wake to find her gone, and the whispers would begin. "Foolish girl," they would say, "no one returns from the hills." But Nia had spent her life being unseen. Now, she walked into a place where only those forgotten dared to tread. The deeper she ventured, the heavier the silence grew. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small creatures, only the slow rise of the mist and the steady pounding of her own heart. And then, from the shadows, a voice. Low, knowing. "You have come at last." Nia froze. Before her, a woman sat upon a great stone, her frame wrapped in a cloak the color of midnight. Her hair was silver as the river under moonlight, her eyes, dark wells that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. The spirit weaver. The woman did not smile, did not move. She simply watched, as though she had been waiting for this moment for longer than Nia had been alive. "The storm does not ask permission before it breaks the sky," she said, "and yet, here you are, seeking what was buried." Nia did not understand, but something deep in her bones stirred at the woman's words. "I do not seek anything," she said quietly. The spirit weaver tilted her head. "No? Then why does the wind call your name?" She raised a hand, and the air around them shifted. The mist curled, carrying whispers that only Nia could hear. Words half forgotten, voices from long ago. The ground beneath her trembled, not with fear, but with something old, something waking. "You are the last of them," the spirit weaver said. "The blood of the daughters of the storm runs in your veins, and yet you walk like one without roots, without power." Nia's breath caught. The daughters of the storm. She had heard the name in old stories, whispered by grandmothers when the fires burned low. Women who once commanded the wind and the rain, whose voices could summon the earth to rise or the skies to weep. But those were tales, weren't they? The spirit weaver's gaze did not waver. Power forgotten is not power lost. It waits, buried like a seed, until the right moment. She stepped closer, placing a hand against Nia's chest. "And yours has begun to stir." A shiver ran through Nia's spine, like the first breath of a coming storm. For days, the spirit weaver tested her. At dawn, she taught Nia to listen, not with her ears, but with her spirit. The wind carried secrets, the ground pulsed with stories, the trees bent to unseen rhythms. At midday, she made her walk blindfolded through the hills, sensing obstacles, before she touched them. At night, she forced Nia to move like the shadows, swift and silent, until her feet no longer stumbled. It was not easy. The land was merciless, the training relentless. Her body ached, her muscles burned. She fell 100 times. She failed even more, but with each wound, each breath of exhaustion, something within her hardened, sharpened. The girl the village had once ignored was no more. She did not know how much time passed. Perhaps weeks, perhaps months. The village no longer lived in her thoughts. It had already buried her in its memory, whispered of her foolishness before moving on. To them, she was gone, like dust scattered by the wind, but far beyond Kumba, beyond the safety of warm fires and familiar voices. Two souls had not forgotten her. Obeni and Zuba sat in the dark, their wrists bound with thick ropes, their backs scarred from lashes. They had left the village with dreams of glory, of proving their worth in battle, but the warlord who had promised them honor had given them only chains. They were not warriors here. They were nothing. And as they lay upon the cold, hard ground, hunger gnawing at their bellies, the weight of their choices pressing upon them, they saw, perhaps for the first time, the truth. Naya had been invisible to them, a shadow unworthy of their notice. But now, they were the ones unseen, forgotten, in a place where strength meant nothing without wisdom. And for the first time, in the suffocating silence of regret, they whispered a name they had once mocked. Nya. A full year had passed, yet the village remained shackled in fear. The air was heavy with unspoken sorrow and the weight of despair, pressed upon the people like an iron yoke. They gathered in the village square, their eyes downcast, their spirits broken. It was the day of tribute, the day they surrendered their harvest, their livestock, sometimes even their own kin, to the warlord. Silence ruled the air, not the silence of peace, but that of submission. The warriors of Annika stood watch, their spears gleaming under the dull sky. No one dared resist. Those who had tried now lay buried beneath the soil, their names already forgotten. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, thick and ominous, carrying an unnatural chill. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling leaves in a way that sent shivers down the spines of the elders. The sky, once a gentle blue, had deepened to a restless gray. A feeling of unease settled over the village like the hush before a storm. Elder Baku shifted uneasily, his ancient bones sensing what his eyes could not yet see. "The air is restless today," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Others glanced at him but said nothing. They had long since stopped looking for signs, stopped believing in omens, stopped hoping for change. A lone figure stepped onto the dry earth of the village square, wrapped in a dark cloak that seemed to drink in the light. At first, no one noticed. The people were too consumed with their own misery to pay heed to the stranger. But as the figure moved forward, the crowd unconsciously parted, as if guided by some unseen force. A hushed murmur rippled through the gathering, curiosity flickering like a dying ember. The air around the stranger felt charged, humming with an energy unfamiliar yet deeply unsettling. Obeni clutched Zuba's arm. "Who is that?" she whispered, but Zuba only shook his head. Elder Baku stepped forward, his aged eyes narrowing as they studied the figure. And then, as recognition dawned, his lips curled into a mocking smile. "So," he said, his voice carrying a sharp edge of disbelief, "you have returned to die with us?" His laughter rang out, hollow and cruel, and like sheep following their shepherd. Others joined in. The sound of their mockery echoed against the thatched roofs, filling the air with scorn. They had waited for salvation, but this was no warrior, no champion, just a girl they had already forgotten. Slowly, the figure raised a hand, gripping the edges of the hood. As it was pulled back, the laughter faltered. The villagers gasped, their voices catching in their throats. It was Naya. But it was not the Naya they had once ignored. Gone was the small, quiet girl who had been nothing more than a shadow in their midst. Her eyes, once filled with doubt, now burned with something fierce, something ancient. Her presence was undeniable, her gaze commanding. The very air around her felt heavier, as if the wind itself awaited her command. "I have not come to die," she said, her voice strong, steady. "I have come to end this." A murmur spread through the villagers like dry grass catching fire. Some stepped back in fear, while others shook their heads in disbelief. "Foolishness," an old man scoffed. "No one defies Annika and lives." But Naya did not waver. She turned her gaze upon them, her expression unreadable. "You have been afraid for too long," she said, "but the warlord's reign ends. Tonight." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Words were easy, promises even easier, but warlords were not felled by words. Then, without warning, Nia lifted her hand toward the sky. A sudden gust of wind howled through the square, whipping up dust and shaking the flames of the village torches. The fire flickered, bent, stretched unnaturally as if it, too, was listening. Gasps rose from the crowd, fear and awe woven together. The wind obeyed her. The fire danced at her will. And for the first time in a long, long time, the people of the village felt something stir within them, something they had thought lost. Hope. The village held its breath as the distant glow of torches crept closer, flickering like the eyes of hungry beasts. The warlord's forces were coming. The people huddled in their homes, too afraid to look, too powerless to fight. For years, Annika had taken what he wanted: their food, their children, their dignity. He was a storm they could not escape, an unshakable curse upon their land. But tonight, the wind carried a different promise. Nya stood alone at the edge of the village, her cloak billowing like a dark wing, her feet firm against the trembling earth. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but it was not the sound of the warlord's drums. It was something deeper, older, something that answered to her. The villagers whispered from their doorways, their eyes peering through the cracks in their fear. A girl, only a girl. Could she truly stand against Annika's wrath? Laughter shattered the silence. Deep, cruel, and full of mockery, it rolled over the village like a wave of scorn. Annika sat atop his black stallion, his armor gleaming in the dim firelight. His warriors flanked him, their faces painted with the marks of men who had never lost a battle. He looked at Nia, this lone girl standing between him and his conquest, and he laughed again. "This is what you send to face me?" he sneered, his voice rich with amusement. "A child wrapped in rags?" The warriors laughed with him, their hands gripping the hilts of their blades. They had crushed men twice her size, burned entire villages to ash. What was she to them but a moment's distraction? "Seize her," Annika commanded, barely sparing her another glance. "Break her so the others learn their place." The first warrior stepped forward, his spear glinting in the firelight. He lunged, but before his blade could reach her, Nia was gone. The villagers gasped. One moment she had been standing in the torchlight, and the next she was nothing but a whisper in the wind. The warrior stumbled forward, his balance lost to the sudden emptiness before him. "What trickery!" he began, but his words were stolen as a sudden gust of wind roared through the square, knocking him to the ground. More warriors charged, their movements swift, trained, but not swift enough. Nia weaved between them like a shadow, her feet barely touching the earth. The wind answered her call, twisting around her like an invisible shield, pushing back every blade, every fist. She was no longer just a girl. She was the storm itself. Lightning split the sky, turning night into day for a single, blinding moment. The warlord's warriors recoiled, shielding their eyes from the burning light. The ground trembled beneath them, the very earth rebelling against their presence. Annika's sneer faltered. He had crushed many enemies, silenced many rebellions, but this was something beyond his knowing. The villagers watched in stunned silence. This was the same Nia they had once ignored, the girl who had been nothing but a whisper in their midst. But now she stood before them, bending the storm, to her will, fighting for them when they had long since stopped fighting for themselves. Abeni and Zuba, shackled among the warlord's captives, stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. They had once mocked her, cast her aside as weak, unworthy, and yet here she was, the only thing standing between them and death. Annika's face darkened. He was a warlord, a man who had built his kingdom on the bones of those who had defied him. He would not be bested by a mere girl. Without a word, he turned his horse, preparing to flee into the darkness. Cowards lived to fight another day, but then her voice cut through the wind, sharp as a blade. "You stole my mother. Where is she?" Ew, warlord slowed. Then he turned, a cruel smile curling upon his lips. "Your mother?" he echoed, feigning surprise. "Ah, yes, I remember her. She begged." He leaned forward, his voice low, taunting. "Just like you will." Naya's breath caught, fury coiling deep within her chest. The wind howled, mirroring the storm inside her. Without hesitation, she raised her hands, and the sky answered. A powerful gust roared through the village, lifting Annika from his saddle. He let out a strangled cry as the storm carried him, twisting and pulling until he was nothing but a fading shadow swallowed by the night. Silence. Then, slowly, the villagers stepped forward, their disbelief turning to something else. Something they had not felt in years. Hope. Nia stood among them, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The weak girl they had once overlooked was gone. In her place stood a force greater than fear, greater than the warlord who had tormented them. A savior, a storm, their storm. The warriors who had once stood unshaken, their blades dripping with the blood of the innocent, now stumbled in terror. Their leader was gone, swallowed by the storm's wrath, and without him they were nothing more than scattered embers of a dying fire. Feet pounded against the earth, armor clattered as men who had once terrorized the land fled into the night, their spirits broken. The villagers, frozen in years of fear, watched in stunned silence. Could it truly be over? Was the darkness that had gripped their home finally lifting? A whisper ran through the crowd, then a murmur, then a cry. Hope, like a long-buried seed, broke free from the soil. Mothers clutched their children. Warriors who had laid down their spears lifted their heads. Their prison had been broken, not by the strength of many, but by the will of one. And there she stood, her cloak torn, her breath heavy, the wind still, circling her like a spirit that refused to leave its master. Naya. The girl they had dismissed, the girl they had doubted. Now, she was their savior. They gathered around her, eyes brimming with gratitude, voices rising in praise. "You saved us," a woman sobbed, dropping to her knees. "You are our hero," a child called out, clinging to his mother's side. The once proud warriors of the village, those who had trained for battle yet never dared to stand against the warlord, now bowed their heads in respect. But as the voices swelled, Naya raised a hand. The crowd fell silent. Her voice, though steady, held no triumph. "I did not fight for your love," she said, her gaze sweeping over them. "I fought for justice." Her words, sharp as the wind she commanded, cut through their joy. The villagers exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. "Where were you when he came the first time?" she continued, her voice unwavering. "Where were you when he took my mother? When he took our sons, our daughters? You bowed. You let him take what he wanted while I stood alone in the dust." A hush fell over the crowd, shame creeping into their eyes. Among them, two figures knelt, their heads bowed low, Abeni and Zuba, the same ones who had once mocked her, who had cast her aside as weak, unworthy. Now they trembled before her, their chains of arrogance broken. Zuba's lips parted, but no words came. What apology could undo the past? Abeni's, hands clenched in her lap, the proud woman who had once sneered at Naya's defiance now found herself speechless. On cool nights, when the fires burned low and the moon hung high, the elders spoke of the girl they had once ignored. They told of the storm she had summoned, the enemy she had crushed, the fear she had shattered. They told of the moment she turned from the throne, choosing instead to leave behind something far greater than a crown. And when the wind howled through the trees, The villagers would pause. When the thunder rumbled in the distance, the children would smile. "It is her," they would say. "She is watching." Nya had left no mark on the earth, no monument, no title. Yet she remained. Not in stone, not in stories alone, but in the very air itself. She was in the rustling leaves, in the whisper of the river, in the distant roll of the storm. She had never wanted to be a warrior. She had never wanted to be a queen. She had become something greater, and her name would never fade.